do I have here? Oh my goodness, you're gonna have to sit next to Henry. Okay, come on a little bit closer. Yeah, that's your new friend Henry. Okay? Oh my goodness, I gotta tell you about Henry. When your mommy was a little girl, when I was a little boy, and when Nana was a little girl, and we went to a place that you really like near Pittsburgh, Kennywood Park, we had to be this tall in order to get on the rides. You know that, Blakely? I'm so happy you're here today, but we had to be that tall. You know, I had to wait till I was 16. It was very embarrassing. But nonetheless, here it is right here, and we just had so much fun. That was my Father's Day gift from your Uncle Keith. Yeah, he has a nice sense of humor. So for anybody who's from Pittsburgh area, if you remember Henry, he's here now, and I'm finally able to say that I can ride all the rides now because I'm tall enough. This is really neat. Now, today, you have a friend here.
Yes.
Who is your friend? Blakely. I'm so happy you're here. How old are you, Blakely?
Around 6.
Oh my goodness, that is so much fun. You know, you and Betty really enjoy being together, don't you? And we've been having so much fun reading this. It's a collection of bedtime Bible stories for children. And look on here. If you look carefully on here, you're going to see something really kind of neat. This is written by a wonderful priest named Father Homer Rogers. But look on here. Do you see? This was drawn a long time ago. That's supposed to be... Yeah. And then if you look in there, you get to see a few others. But we're getting ready because we have a man who was having a tough time of it because he wanted to get all of the Jewish people out of a place called Egypt. Did you say Egypt? Egypt, yeah. And his name is Moses. Absolutely right. So let's see where we are today. Moses spent a busy 2 or 3 days going around talking to the heads of the families of Israel, getting them to agree to let him negotiate with Pharaoh on their behalf. He had to do a lot of talking, but finally they were all lined up on his side, and off he went to visit the place. You will remember that Moses had been a little boy in the palace. Yeah, he was. And he knew every nook and cranny, every secret passage and back stairway, so he had no trouble getting past the guards and finding his way to the private rooms of the king. In your house, I think I noticed that you have some private hideaway places almost. I looked that there was a place near the powder room.
Yeah, in the bathroom, you can, like, when you're going to the bathroom, you see this other door. So when you open it, you see, like, this secret little room. We put, like, our stuff in.
Our secret room's fun.
Yeah.
And when do you go in
Do
there?
you ever have a secret room?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have things that are just your own that you put somewhere there?
Yeah.
And you know, in yours, you get to go in there for some reason.
In my room?
Yeah.
In my room, there's like a little door that I keep all my stuff in, and Brianna doesn't because she has one. And I always go in it, and I always look at my stuff.
It's kind of fun, isn't it?
And I always go get my binky out of there.
Your binky is kept in there. Now, that is very important. You need to have a good place for your binky, I think.
It's my blanket one.
Yes, and I'm glad.
It's special.
It is special. Everybody has to have something special. In fact, why do you kind of keep that place special? Would you ever have to go in that place for anything? If the weather's bad, would you go
Yeah.
there? Would you?
Like if there was a tornado.
Oh, yeah. And I understand occasionally in Texas that happens, right?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. It happens.
I do that sometimes.
Do you? Well, see, so you have a place that's going to be safe for you. And you see, what happened is Moses knew where all the hiding places were at the palace because he was brought up with the really important people there. So, there was a new Pharaoh who happened to be there when Moses was trying to get out of Egypt. The old one had died. Now this Pharaoh had been a little boy along with Moses. They had been raised together, kind of like brothers in the palace. Well, sir, the king was sitting in his study reading a murder mystery and eating peanuts when a secret panel beside the fireplace swung open and Moses and Aaron stepped out into the room. Pharaoh was startled. Show me what a startled face looks like. That's right, that's startled. And didn't recognize Moses at first. He said, "Who in the ever-loving world are you, and how did you get in?" Moses said, "Take a good look."
Eyes.
The king stared long at him, and finally he recognized him. He said, "Well, fry me for a flounder if it isn't Moses." Moses got right down to business, told the king that he wanted him to let the Israelites go out into the desert, 3 days' journey, with all their wives and little ones, all their bags and belongings and their binkies, and all their canaries and their cattle to hold a camp meeting and worship God. King Pharaoh was reaping a considerable profit from the slave labor. All the Israelites who worked for them, remember, they were making all kinds of things. And he wasn't about to give them a religious holiday, so he naturally refused. Instead, he ordered his taskmasters to make the Israelites work even harder. They'd been engaged in making mud bricks. The way you make mud bricks is to mix the mud with straw, which the king had been furnishing. Now, he made them gather their own straw and still make just as many bricks as before. The Jews were really put out with Moses. "Can't be any worse off, you say?" They shouted at him that night. "Boy, you've really made a mess of things now, you and your big mouth. Why couldn't you let well enough alone?" Moses said, "Just you wait and see. I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve." Pharaoh is going to be real sorry he didn't listen to God's command. But the Jews kept on grumbling. Can you grumble? Can you grumble a little bit? Yeah, that's probably what they were doing. Yeah, that's good. You're good grumblers. Yeah.
What, is that a secret?
That might be. We'll check it out later. But if it's a secret we find out about, it won't be a secret anymore, right? So Moses went back to Pharaoh and said, "Listen, cousin, you may not know it, but you're trifling with God. And if you don't let us go, you'll be sorry. And don't say I didn't warn you." Pharaoh replied, "Who is this God? I don't know anybody by that name." Moses said, "Want to see a trick?" And he tossed his miraculous staff. Do you remember that staff last week? Threw down his magnificent staff, which was like a big stick, on the ground, and it turned into a snake. How do snakes sound? Do you ever have any snake sounds? That's right. And Pharaoh was a bit impressed. But he called all his Egyptian magicians, all the Egyptian magicians. Boy, that's hard to say twice. Say that twice. Egyptian magicians. And they tossed their magic staffs on the ground, and they all turned into snakes. Also, Moses' snake ate up the Egyptian snakes. And still Pharaoh refused to let the children of Israel go. Then Moses went out and prayed and said, "God, I showed him your trick, and he still wouldn't let us go. What do we do now?" God said, "Moses, you ain't seen nothing yet. Fasten your seatbelt, because you're going to take Mr. Pharaoh for a wild ride." The next day, Pharaoh went fishing down the Nile River, and Moses met him and asked him once more to let the Israelites go. Pharaoh just laughed at him and said, "Get out of my way, you two-bit magician." So Moses stretched out his staff over the river, and all the water turned to blood. Yeah, just like that. The fish all died. I guess fish don't like to swim in blood. And Moses said, "I hope you catch a nice mess of dead fish, cousin." Pharaoh was hopping mad, but he still wouldn't let the Jews go free.
Because he did that from all the blood of the fishes. Did that people the blood?
Well, yeah, when he went like that, the water all turned into blood. So now the fish are looking around like this. What do we do next?
Because there's blood in it. Because because he killed the fishes and the fish's blood came out?
No, it really wasn't that. He turned the water first into blood, but then the fish, they're going like this. They need some oxygen out of the water, and guess what? Only blood. And they died. So Pharaoh was hopping mad, but he still wouldn't let the Jews go free. So Moses waved his staff again, and all of a sudden the ground was covered with frogs. I know. And they weren't Kermit. So thick that you couldn't walk without stepping on them. Pharaoh was a bit squeamish. And every time he stepped on a frog, it raised goose pimples on him. Yep. So he told Moses that if he'd make the frogs go away, he'd let the Jews go free. So Moses waved his staff, and all the frogs disappeared, and Pharaoh said, "Fooled you. Of course I'm not going to let the Jews go free." Moses wasn't a bit surprised. He'd rather expected Pharaoh to go back on his word, so he stretched out his staff again and said something like, "Abracadabra, candelabra." And the whole land was crawling with fleas and lice and itchy little bugs. Pharaoh was trying to scratch himself. Show me what it looks like when you're itchy. Yeah, that's what I think he's doing. All over at once. You ever been itchy like that? The bug, oh my. And they didn't have enough hands. He was dancing around like a crazy man. But he was so mad now that he wouldn't think of giving in. So, Moses waved his staff once more and said, "Pumpernickel, kosher pickle." And flies began to swarm all over everything. You never saw so many flies, not even at a picnic. And Pharaoh had to stop scratching to swat the flies. So he finally said to Moses, "Make them all go away. I'll let you folks go. Hold your camp meeting and out in the desert." Moses said, "All right, I'll ask God to make the flies and lice go away. But don't you deceive me anymore. Go back to your word, or worse things will happen." So Moses prayed, and the flies all went away. And as soon as they were gone, Pharaoh said, "Sucker, try and go and see how far you get." Moses was beginning to get kind of mad at this time. What with Pharaoh making promises and then going back on them? So he said to Pharaoh, "Okay, that's torn it." So Moses stretched out his staff once more and said, "Sesquipedalian Episcopalian." And all the Egyptians began to break out with some boils, sore boils. And you know, they're like bumps all over you, and they are so sore. Pharaoh had boils on the bottoms of his feet. Imagine it'd be like that on the bottom of your feet, and you have to walk on those nasty things. So he couldn't stand up, and boils where he sat down. And so he couldn't sit down, so he was in real trouble. He couldn't stand up, couldn't sit down. Kind of difficult to know what to do.
Lay down?
You know what, he might have had to do that, but I'll bet you all of a sudden the boils got there too.
What did it, and what if he was like?
Oh, I know it. Well, you know what?
And then now the snake bit him. Did he
you
have
know-
to do like all over the place?
Well, you know what?
He had to do that.
I think maybe that's where one of those modern dances is the boil dance came from. What do you think? So, all the other Egyptians came and they begged Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, but he was such a vain, proud man that he couldn't admit he was wrong. He was about as stubborn a guy as you ever did see. So once more he refused. Moses then said to Pharaoh, "Okay, we've just been playing around up until now. Now we're going to get down to business." Moses waved his wand and said, "Filibuster, feather duster." And it began to hailstones. Have you ever seen hailstones? Woo! As big as baseballs. So
What are
they're like ice, you know. They're
they?
You ever seen that?
Humongous. It's like
Yeah.
this big.
Texans oftentimes pray for them so they can get a new roof and work with the insurance company on that. So anyway, they were so thick the ground was covered in minutes. Everybody that wasn't under a solid roof got bopped on the head and knocked out as cold as January, and all the grain in the fields and all the leaves on the trees were stripped bare and knocked down flat. Windows were broken out, and all in all, you never saw such a hailstorm. And still the king was hard-headed, wouldn't let them go. Moses said, Pharaoh, old boy, I can keep this up longer than you can. Pharaoh said, Moses, if I ever lay eyes on you again, you've had it. Now get out of my sight and stay out. Moses said, Pharaoh, I'm giving you one last chance. Can we leave the country? Pharaoh then said a naughty word that meant no. I'm not going to tell you what the naughty word was. So Moses left. Yep. And just as he was leaving, he stretched out his staff and said, Zoroaster mustard plaster. And suddenly, it was as black as the inside of your pocket. You literally couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And everybody that was away from home wandered around and got into the wrong house. And even if you struck a match, it went right out again. Boy, it was black. After 3 days during which Pharaoh sat around in the dark, he sent for Moses and begged him to take his people and leave the country. Moses said, I thought you'd see the light if it was dark for long enough. So Moses prayed, and the sun came out, and the darkness went away, and Pharaoh began to feel better. And once again, said, the Jews couldn't leave the country. How dense can you get? Even God was beginning to get impatient with Pharaoh by this time. So he spoke to Moses, and he said, one more plague will I bring on the Egyptians, and then they'll let you go. Now, here's what you do. And God gave Moses a lot of rather complicated instructions for what has become something called the Passover Feast of the Jews. Moses, acting on God's instruction, called all the Jews together and explained to them very carefully what was going to happen. On a certain night, a couple of weeks hence, God would send the angel of death. And so the angel wouldn't get confused and kill a lot of the Jews along with the Egyptians. The Jews were to select a lamb. Now, can you make it sound like a lamb? That's good. No, it's good job. Good job. That's why you're down there, because you're trying to pretend that you're a lamb.
I think she fell.
Yeah, I get it. So you're my sheep right now. You're the lamb. But here's the next part. It says, select the lamb and kill it.
No.
Not going to kill you. And sprinkle the blood of the lamb on your doorpost. On there, and roast and eat it along with some unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They were also to be all packed and ready to go early the next morning. Right, sheep? Right, sheep. Sure enough, just like God had said on that certain night, the oldest child of every Egyptian family died in his sleep. Uh-oh, pretend. I need you to come back here and pretend. Okay, ready? Come on back here. They all, ready for the key word? They died in their sleep.
They would be like,
By daylight, all the Egyptians had put much pressure on Pharaoh that he called Moses and said, please, 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 pack up and get out of Egypt. So the Jews all packed up and started for the border of Egypt. And I want to see how fast you can run out of Egypt. See how fast you can run out of Egypt. Right now. Run out of Egypt. Get going. Get going. And I'll pick up with you next week for the big break.
that's what choices. Oh. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. How did you enjoy seeing all the people get out of Egypt? Did you ever see anybody leave that fast before?
No.
Bye-bye.